My parents clapped with tears in their eyes as my sister raised her crystal flute and thanked them for raising an only child. I sat at table one sipping the vintage champagne I had secretly paid for and said absolutely nothing. I just smiled, reached into my designer clutch, and traced the edges of the velvet box they had been expecting all night. I was going to give away their multi-million-dollar retirement plan to the only people who actually deserved it, leaving my toxic family with absolutely nothing. My name is Zora. I am 35 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life funding the delusion of my parents' generational wealth. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who demanded your resources but denied your existence. Trust me, you will want to hear how I finally stopped playing the loyal scapegoat. Growing up in a wealthy enclave just outside of Atlanta, my parents Evelyn and Richard were obsessed with appearances. To the outside world, we were the picture-perfect Black family. My father was a retired executive, my mother a socialite who practically lived at the country club. But inside our meticulously decorated six-bedroom home, the reality was entirely different. I was the quiet, driven daughter who was always expected to work hard, stay out of the way, and handle the heavy lifting. My younger sister Chloe, however, was the golden child. Pampered, loud, and endlessly demanding, she was treated like absolute royalty. While I spent my 20s building my commercial real estate development firm from the ground up, revitalizing historic properties in marginalized neighborhoods across the city, Chloe spent her time playing at being a lifestyle influencer. Her entire brand was bankrolled by our parents' credit cards until those cards inevitably maxed out. That was when my mother would call me crying about losing the house or keeping up appearances, and I would quietly transfer the funds to save them. Tonight was supposed to be the pinnacle of their social calendar. It was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary gala. I had rented out the grand ballroom of the most exclusive country club in Buckhead. I am talking $50,000 of sheer extravagance. Floor-to-ceiling floral arrangements of white hydrangeas and imported roses, a 12-piece live jazz band, and an open bar serving top-shelf liquor to 200 of Atlanta elite social climbers. I wore a custom emerald green evening gown, sitting quietly next to my grandmother, Nana Beatrice. I was the one who signed the catering checks, the venue deposit, and the florist invoices. Yet I was placed at the far edge of the head table, treated like an unpaid event coordinator rather than a daughter. The room grew quiet as the jazz band slowly faded out. The sharp clinking of a silver spoon against crystal echoed across the massive ballroom. Chloe stood up, her sequined dress catching the light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. She looked radiant, playing her part perfectly. Beside her sat her husband Trent, a smug white man who loved to give me unsolicited business advice despite running 3 failed tech startups that my father had secretly bailed out. Chloe cleared her throat, holding up her glass of vintage champagne. The room fell into a respectful, expectant hush. "I want to make a toast," Chloe announced, her voice echoing through the premium sound system I had paid for. "To my amazing parents, Evelyn and Richard. You two have shown everyone in this room what true love looks like. You gave me the world. You supported my dreams when things got hard. And honestly, thank you for raising me as an only child. It is a heavy crown, but I wear it for you." The words hung in the heavy, perfumed air. An only child. My chest tightened, a familiar dull ache spreading through my ribs, but I forced my face to remain perfectly still. I looked around the room. 200 people, many of whom had known our family for decades, just smiled, laughed softly, and nodded in agreement. Not a single person looked my way. It was as if I had been entirely erased from the family tree right in front of my own eyes. But the absolute worst part was not Chloe saying it. The worst part was watching my parents' reaction as they basked in the glow of her blatant disrespect. My father Richard did not flinch. He did not pull the microphone away or offer a polite correction for the sake of the guests. Instead, he let out a booming, affectionate chuckle that vibrated over the speakers. He stood up from his velvet-draped chair, walked over to Chloe, and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "You have always been our greatest joy." Beside him, my mother Evelyn delicately dabbed at the corner of her eye with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. She reached across the table, taking Chloe by the hand. "Our perfect girl," she murmured loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. "We are so incredibly proud of the woman you have become." I sat exactly 4 feet away from them. I did not drop my gaze. I did not let a single tear slip down my face. Nana Beatrice shifted slightly in her seat next to me, her sharp eyes darting from the stage to my expressionless face. I felt her warm, wrinkled hand briefly press against my knee under the table, a silent anchor in a room actively trying to drown me. She was the only one in this room who knew the truth about who actually kept the lights on in my parents' mansion. Just as the applause began to ripple through the crowd again, Trent leaned over. Trent was my sister's husband, a man whose confidence vastly outweighed his competence. He wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that I knew for a fact was purchased using a credit card tied to my name, though he thought it was my father's secret slush fund. He smelled of expensive bourbon and unearned arrogance. He leaned so close to me that I could feel the heat of his breath against my neck. "Do not take it personal, Z," he whispered, his tone dripping with condescending pity. "You are just built for the background. Some people are the stars, and some people set the stage. You are really great at setting the stage." I slowly turned my head to look at him. His pale blue eyes were crinkled in a mocking smile. This was a man who had burned through hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to launch tech companies that never made it past a pitch deck. A man who currently lived rent-free in a condo my parents claimed they bought for the newlyweds, but was actually mortgaged under one of my subsidiary companies. He thought he was putting me in my place. He thought he was untouchable because he had married the golden child and secured his spot in the so-called family legacy. I offered him a slow, measured smile that did not reach my eyes. "You are absolutely right, Trent," I replied smoothly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Setting the stage is crucial. You never know when the floor is going to drop out from under the stars." He blinked confused for a fraction of a second before scoffing and leaning back into his chair. He draped his arm over Chloe's shoulder, completely missing the warning. That was the thing about arrogance. It made you completely blind to the trap until the steel jaws snapped shut. The band struck up a lively jazz number, and the waiters began circling the room again, pouring more of the champagne I had imported from France. The hypocrisy of the moment was almost suffocating. My parents were parading around the dance floor, greeting local politicians and wealthy socialites, accepting compliments on their beautiful family and their supposedly endless wealth. They were playing the role of affluent benefactors, while their bank accounts were practically running on fumes. For years, they had demanded my financial support under the guise of family duty. When I bought my first commercial property at 25, my mother told me I was being selfish for not letting my father manage the deed. When I landed a massive development contract with the city, my father said it was unseemly for a woman to be so aggressive in business, and suggested I step down and let Trent take over my firm. I refused, which only cemented my role as the difficult, ungrateful daughter. Yet behind closed doors, whenever the mortgage on their Buckhead estate was due, or whenever Chloe needed a $50,000 bailout for her failing influencer business, they never hesitated to demand the money from me. They took my resources but denied my existence. I looked down at the velvet box resting inside my clutch. It contained the deed and the keys to the Auburn Avenue Plaza. It was a historic property in a thriving black neighborhood, a multi-million-dollar asset I had spent 2 years renovating. My parents had been hounding me for months to transfer the property to the family trust so Trent could use it for his newest venture. They expected me to hand it over tonight as an anniversary gift. They thought they had broken my spirit enough that I would just comply to buy their scraps of affection. They were wrong. I closed my clutch with a soft, decisive click. The time for being the quiet bank account was officially over. A discreet tap on my shoulder pulled my attention away from the lingering sting of my sister's toast. It was Julian, the senior catering manager for the country club. He looked visibly pale, clutching a leather-bound folio to his chest like a shield. He had expertly navigated around the crowded tables, completely ignoring the guests of honor, my parents, and walking directly to the only person in the room who actually mattered when it came to the club's bottom line. Me, Miss Zora. "I am so sorry to interrupt," Julian whispered, leaning down so only I could hear over the jazz band. "But we have a slight issue with the bar tab. Your mother instructed the bartenders to start pouring the Louis XIII cognac for her bridge club friends. We have exceeded the initial beverage deposit by $15,000. Should I cut them off or inform your father?" I looked over toward the bar. My mother was holding court, laughing loudly with three women draped in diamonds, a crystal snifter of $3,000 cognac resting casually in her manicured hand. She was playing the billionaire hostess on a bankrupt budget. If Julian went to my father right now, Richard would likely turn pale, pull Julian into a corner, and try to negotiate a payment plan he had no intention of honoring. "Do not cut them off, Julian," I said smoothly, "and do not bother my father." I reached back into my clutch and pulled out my heavy metal American Express Centurion card. I placed it onto his leather folio. "Keep the top shelf open for the rest of the night. Let my parents and their friends have absolutely everything they want. Add a 20% gratuity for your staff for dealing with the sudden menu changes and close out the final master bill on this card." Julian let out a quiet, profound sigh of relief. "Thank you, Miss Zora. You are incredibly generous. I will bring the receipt right back." As Julian walked away, Nana Beatrice leaned closer to me. Her sharp, intelligent eyes missed absolutely nothing. "How much are they bleeding you for tonight, baby?" she asked, her voice raspy, but full of protective warmth. "50,000 for the baseline, Nana," I replied softly, keeping my eyes fixed on the dance floor. "Plus another 15 just now for Evelyn's ego. But consider it an investment. It is the cost of the final curtain call." Nana Beatrice gave a low hum of approval. A fool and their money are soon parted. But a fool with someone else's money, well, they just build a taller cliff to fall from. You make sure you let them fall, Zora. Do not catch them this time. I smiled at my grandmother. She was the only reason I had survived my childhood with my sanity intact. When my parents were busy parading Chloe around pageants and expensive prep schools, Nana Beatrice was the one teaching me how to read financial statements at her kitchen table. She knew my parents were drowning in debt. She knew about the second mortgages, the maxed-out credit lines, and the secret loans my father had taken out just to keep up their country club membership. And she knew that I had been the silent safety net for the past 5 years, paying the mortgage on the Buckhead estate, so my parents would not face the ultimate humiliation of foreclosure. I watched Julian return and discreetly slide the signed receipt back to me. $15,200. Approved. I tucked the receipt next to the velvet box inside my clutch. That box held the deed and the keys to the Auburn Avenue Plaza. It was $2 million of prime commercial real estate that my parents felt entitled to simply because they shared my DNA. They had spent the last 3 months treating me like a stubborn child, holding on to a toy that rightfully belonged to Chloe and her husband Trent. My mother had even sent me daily listings of luxury cars, hinting at what Trent would buy once he liquidated the historic property I had spent 2 years fighting to protect. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was breathtaking. They honestly believed that my years of hard work, my late nights reviewing zoning laws, and my strategic investments were all just a piggy bank meant to fund my sister's vanity projects. They thought the $50,000 I spent tonight was an apology for not being the daughter they wanted. They had no idea it was actually their severance package. The band transitioned into a slow romantic ballad. My parents took to the center of the dance floor, swaying under the spotlight while the crowd clapped softly. It was a picture-perfect illusion. I felt the air in the ballroom growing thick and suffocating. The scent of expensive perfume, the clinking of crystal, the fake smiles, it was all suddenly too much. I needed to breathe before the real show began. I stood up, smoothing down the heavy silk of my emerald gown. I am going to get some air, I whispered to Nana Beatrice. Take your time, she replied, her eyes fixed coldly on my parents as they danced. The stage is not going anywhere. I picked up my clutch, the weight of the velvet box grounding me, and walked away from the head table. I navigated through the sea of guests, keeping my expression pleasantly neutral as I headed toward the grand double doors of the lobby. I knew exactly what would happen next. I knew my mother would never miss an opportunity to corner me away from the crowd. I was counting on it. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into the quiet marble-floored foyer, waiting for the trap to spring. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the jazz music and the suffocating chatter of the ballroom. The foyer was an expanse of cool white marble and gilded mirrors. I walked over to a massive arrangement of white orchids resting on a marble console table and took a deep, steadying breath. I did not have to wait long. Less than a minute later, the heavy doors opened again. The sharp, rapid clicking of designer heels echoed across the marble floor. I turned to see my mother Evelyn. She had left her tearful, adoring mother persona back at table 1. Her face was set in a tight, calculating expression, the kind she usually reserved for negotiating with luxury boutique managers who refused to accept her expired coupons. She smoothed down the front of her beaded gown and marched directly toward me. I expected her to start with an excuse, a half-hearted apology for Chloe and her toast. Something along the lines of Chloe having had too much champagne, or me just being overly sensitive as usual. But my mother did not even bother with the pleasantries. You brought the deed to the Auburn Avenue Plaza, right? She asked, her voice sharp and urgent. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not thank me for the $50,000 party happening in the next room. Her eyes dropped immediately to the velvet clutch in my hands. I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. You are not even going to mention what your golden child just said on that stage, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly even. Evelyn waved her manicured hand dismissively, her diamond rings catching the light. Oh, Zora, do not start with the dramatics. You know Chloe gets emotional when she is the center of attention. She meant she felt like an only child sometimes because you were always locked in your room studying or working. It was a compliment to your independence. Now focus. Richard and I are making the big announcement right before they cut the cake. We are officially launching the Family Foundation and announcing the transfer of the plaza. I gripped my clutch a fraction tighter, though I kept my face impassive. The Family Foundation. That was a new phrase. For the past 3 months, they had simply told me Trent needed retail space for a new startup. Now suddenly they were launching a foundation with my hard-earned property as the cornerstone asset. A family foundation, I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. That is ambitious, Evelyn. Considering the family does not actually own any commercial assets to transfer, I own the plaza through my firm. My mother let out an exasperated sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. Do not be difficult tonight, Zora. Not tonight. Your father has invited the mayor, 2 city council members, and half the board of the country club. We need to show them that our family is expanding our philanthropic and business footprint. Chloe and Trent are going to be the face of the new initiative. They need a flagship property to legitimize Trent and his new venture. Auburn Avenue is perfect. It has history, it has character, and most importantly, it is fully renovated and paid off. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. The sheer entitlement radiating from her was almost physical. She was casually demanding a $2 million piece of real estate as if she were asking to borrow a pair of shoes. She wanted me to hand over a property I had bled for just so my sister and her arrogant husband could play pretend business moguls for their high society friends. So just to be clear, I said, my tone deceptively calm. I spent 2 years dealing with contractors, city zoning boards, and historic preservation committees. I sink $2 million into buying and restoring that plaza to protect the legacy Black-owned businesses operating there. And your plan is for me to just sign the deed over to Trent and Chloe so they can be the face of a foundation they did not build. Evelyn stepped closer, dropping her voice into a harsh, commanding whisper. We gave you everything, Zora. We put a roof over your head. We paid for your private schools. We gave you the pedigree that allowed you to walk into those banks and get your precious loans. You owe this family. Chloe is struggling to keep her brand relevant, and Trent needs a win after that nasty business with his last investors. You have more money than you know what to do with. Just give them the keys. Do not ruin your father and his perfect night by being selfish. I looked down at her outstretched hand. She fully expected me to open my clutch, pull out the velvet box, and hand over my life work right there in the lobby. She thought I was the same terrified teenager who used to hand over her allowance so Chloe could buy designer shoes. She thought my silence over the years was submission. She did not realize it was strategy. So let me make sure I understand the math here, Evelyn, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I buy the $2 million Auburn Avenue Plaza. I spend 2 years dealing with the city to secure the permits, and I pay out of pocket to completely renovate it. And your grand plan is for me to just sign the deed over to Trent and Chloe. Evelyn dramatically placed her hand over her chest, gasping as if I had just slapped her. Her eyes widened in performative shock. How can you be so incredibly cold, Zora? She demanded, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. We sacrificed everything to give you a roof over your head. We clothed you. We fed you. We made sure you had the right last name to even walk into those bank meetings. You owe this family. I stared at her, marveling at the sheer delusion. She was equating the bare minimum legal requirements of parenting with a lifelong debt of millions of dollars. She honestly believed that providing me with food and a bedroom in a house she could barely afford gave her permanent ownership of my bank account. Besides, Evelyn added, her tone shifting seamlessly from angry to a whining, desperate plea. Chloe really needs a win right now. Her brand partnerships are drying up, and Trent has been so stressed about providing for her. They need a tangible asset to leverage for their future. You are single. You have no children. What do you even need all that money for anyway? I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but I kept my face entirely blank. A win, I repeated quietly. You mean a bailout? Chloe needs a bailout because she spends $50,000 a month trying to convince the internet she is wealthy. And Trent needs a tangible asset because he burned through all of his investors' cash on his last 3 failed startups. Do not speak about your brother-in-law that way. Evelyn hissed, her eyes narrowing with genuine venom. Trent has vision. He just needs the right canvas to execute it. Auburn Avenue is sitting right there, practically begging for redevelopment. He wants to bring in high-end boutiques and luxury lofts. It will elevate the entire neighborhood. Elevate it by evicting the people who built it, I countered smoothly. Those legacy Black-owned businesses have been there for 40 years, Evelyn. I promised them their leases were safe. I am not handing them over to a man who thinks gentrification is a fun weekend project. Evelyn took a step closer, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. You only have that business because we taught you the value of hard work, she insisted. If we had not been so tough on you, you never would have built your firm. You should be thanking us, Zora. We pushed you to be independent so you could be in a position to help your sister when she needed it. The mental gymnastics were genuinely Olympic level. My parents had ignored me for my entire childhood, pouring all their affection, praise, and financial resources into Chloe. They never attended my college graduation, but they threw Chloe a $10,000 party when she reached 10,000 followers online. Now Evelyn was trying to rebrand years of blatant emotional neglect as a strategic parenting choice designed to make me a billionaire workhorse for her favorite child. Evelyn reached out and grabbed my arm. Her grip dug into my skin, her polished mask slipping entirely to reveal the desperate, greedy woman underneath. You listen to me, she snarled softly. Your father is walking up to that podium in exactly 20 minutes to announce the Richard and Evelyn Legacy Foundation. He is going to tell the entire room that Auburn Avenue is our first major project. If you do not hand over that deed, you will humiliate him in front of the mayor. You will break his heart on our anniversary. Do you really want to be responsible for destroying this family tonight? There it was, the ultimate trap. the weaponization of my father's public image against my private bank account. She was betting everything on my lifelong habit of folding just to keep the peace. She thought the threat of public embarrassment would be enough to make me surrender $2 million of my own hard-earned wealth. She thought I was still desperate for her conditional love. She released my arm, taking a step back and smoothing down the front of her beaded gown. She took a deep breath, instantly rearranging her features back into the composed, elegant socialite persona she wore like armor. "We are going back in there," she commanded, her voice returning to its normal haughty pitch. "And when your father calls you to the stage, you will smile, you will hand over the contents of that velvet box, and you will finally do something to make this family proud. Do you understand me, Zora?" Before I could even formulate a response to her breathtaking audacity, the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swung open again. Loud laughter drifted into the quiet foyer, followed by the heavy, confident footsteps of the two people I despised most in this world. Chloe stepped through the doors first, holding a fresh glass of champagne. Her husband Trent followed right behind her, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit with an air of unearned authority. They looked like a couple out of a luxury magazine catalog, completely oblivious to the real world and entirely dependent on my bank account to stay afloat. "There you are," Chloe said, pouting her glossed lips as she sauntered over to our mother. "The photographer wants to take the family portraits before they bring out the cake." "What are you two doing hiding out here anyway?" Evelyn immediately dropped the vicious glare she had been directing at me. Her face softened into a bright, artificial smile. "We were just discussing the final details of the property transfer, darling. Your sister is very excited to hear about Trent and his incredible new vision for the plaza." Trent beamed, clapping his hands together. His pale eyes locked onto me, practically gleaming with greed. "Outstanding. I was hoping we could get aligned on this before your dad makes the official announcement, Zora. I have been running the numbers all week, and I have to say you stumbled onto a gold mine. You just do not know how to extract the value yet. But do not worry. That is where I come in." I crossed my arms, my velvet clutch pressed against my chest. "Is that so, Trent? Please educate me on how to extract value from a property I spent 2 years developing." He completely missed the lethal sarcasm in my voice. He took a step forward, invading my personal space, ready to mansplain commercial real estate to a woman who owned half the zip code. "Look, Zora, you did a cute job fixing up the brick and mortar, the new plumbing, the updated electrical. It is solid grunt work. But your tenant mix is an absolute disaster. You have a bakery, a bookstore, and a hair salon taking up prime square footage. Those legacy businesses are low yield and completely outdated. They are dead weight." "Those legacy businesses," I replied, my voice dangerously calm, "are the cultural heartbeat of Auburn Avenue. Mr. Henderson has run that bookstore for 40 years. Miss Clara has owned her bakery for decades. They are the reason the city granted us the historic preservation tax credits." Trent scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Nostalgia does not pay the bills, Z. We are going to disrupt the entire block. I am talking about a complete urban pivot. We evict the old tenants. We gut the interiors and create an open-concept sterile tech incubator. We bring in an artisanal matcha bar, some high-end co-working spaces, maybe a boutique fitness studio. We rebrand the whole thing as Silicon Avenue. It will be the premier hub for disruptive tech startups in Atlanta." He was talking about gentrification. He was standing there, a white man who had never successfully launched a single business, cheerfully explaining how he was going to wipe out decades of Black history and culture just to build a playground for his tech bro friends. And he expected me to hand him the deed for free to make it happen. "And how exactly do you plan to fund this massive disruption, Trent?" I asked, tilting my head. "Breaking those commercial leases will cost hundreds of thousands in penalties alone, not to mention the millions required to completely redesign the interiors you just proposed. Where is the capital coming from?" Trent smirked, sharing a conspiratorial look with my sister. "That is the beauty of the Richard and Evelyn Legacy Foundation. Once you transfer the deed to the trust, I can leverage the equity of the fully paid-off plaza to secure a massive line of credit. The building itself will fund its own redesign. We use your asset as collateral, take out a $5 million loan, and boom, we are fully capitalized. It is basic leverage, Zora. I know you usually just flip smaller properties, but this is how the big boys play the game. I stared at him. He wanted to take the debt-free property I had painstakingly paid for, immediately mortgage it to the hilt, and use the bank loan to destroy the very community I had built the plaza to protect. And if his tech hub failed, which it absolutely would, given his track record, the bank would foreclose on the property. He would lose everything, but he would walk away without a scratch, because my name and my parents' names would be the ones tied to the foundation. Chloe chimed in, leaning against Trent's arm. It is going to be so aesthetically pleasing, Zora. My management team is already planning to use the rooftop space for my new brand launch. All my influencer friends are dying to do photo shoots there. You really should be thanking Trent for stepping in to optimize the space. You are so busy with your little construction projects you never would have had the time to maximize the brand potential. My little construction projects. My firm had grossed $30 million last year alone. Chloe did not even know how to file her own taxes. Trent reached out and actually patted me on the shoulder. It was a condescending, heavy-handed pat that took every ounce of my willpower not to physically deflect. You did good, Z. You held on to the property until we were ready to do something real with it. But it is time to pass the baton. Just hand over the deed tonight and I will make sure the family gets a great return on investment. I looked from Trent arrogant smirk to Chloe entitled pout, and finally to Evelyn desperate demanding eyes. They had built an entire fantasy world on top of my bank account. They had already spent the money, evicted the tenants, and claimed the glory in their heads. They thought I was trapped. Chloe sighed heavily, shifting her weight and crossing her arms in a perfect imitation of our mother. She looked at me with an expression of profound boredom mixed with irritation. Zora. Please, she whined, her voice dripping with the practiced innocence she used on her social media followers. Just hand over the keys. You are making this so much harder than it needs to be. Trent has a literal business plan, and you are just hoarding a bunch of old brick buildings because you want to feel important. Do not ruin mom and dad night by being selfish. Selfish! The word echoed in the vast marble space, bouncing off the gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers. It hung in the air between us, heavy and absurd. I had paid for the designer shoes currently on Chloe's feet. I had purchased the diamond tennis bracelets sparkling on my mother's wrist. I was currently paying the mortgage on the sprawling colonial estate my father was boasting about in the next room. I had sacrificed my entire youth working 80-hour weeks, skipping vacations, and denying myself simple luxuries just to keep their ship from sinking. I had covered Trent's failed business loans so he would not face fraud charges from his last set of investors. And here they stood, a united front of wealthy parasites, calling me selfish because I hesitated to hand them the crowning achievement of my career on a silver platter. I looked from Trent, arrogant smirk, to Chloe, entitled pout, and finally to Evelyn, desperate, demanding eyes. I felt something fundamental snap inside my chest. It was not a loud or violent break. It was quiet, like the turning of a lock. For 35 years I had held out a desperate, foolish hope that if I just gave them enough, if I was just successful enough, if I solved enough of their problems, they would eventually see my value. I thought my generosity would eventually buy their genuine love. But looking at their expectant, greedy faces, the truth finally crystallized into pure, unbreakable ice. They did not love me. They loved what they could extract from me. I was not a daughter or a sister to them. I was a limitless ATM, and they were simply annoyed that I was asking for a receipt. There was no redemption waiting for me at the end of this transaction. If I gave them the plaza today, they would demand my company tomorrow. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the icy calm wash over my entire body. I relaxed my grip on my velvet clutch. I looked directly into my sister's perfectly made-up eyes and let a soft, agreeable smile touch my lips. It was the kind of smile you give to a child right before you take away their favorite toy. You know what, Chloe? I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. You are absolutely right. I have been looking at this all wrong. It is time to distribute the family assets. The tension in the foyer vanished instantly, replaced by a wave of suffocating smugness. Trent let out a loud, arrogant bark of laughter, slapping his thigh. I knew you would see reason, Z, he said, actually pointing a finger gun at me. It is just business. You will thank me when the foundation portfolio triples in value under my management. Evelyn let out a massive sigh of relief, reaching forward to pat my cheek as if I were a golden retriever who had finally learned a new trick. Oh, thank goodness, she breathed, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. I knew you would not let us down, Zora. You always do the right thing when push comes to shove. This is going to be the most magnificent announcement. Your father is going to be absolutely thrilled. Chloe clapped her hands together, already pulling out her phone to check her reflection in the camera. Thank God, she muttered, fluffing her blonde hair. I was getting so stressed my makeup was going to crease. So are we doing this before or after the champagne pyramid? Before, Evelyn declared, already turning back toward the heavy mahogany doors that led to the ballroom. Your father is signaling the band right now. Zora, just wait by the edge of the stage. When Richard calls your name, you come up, say a few words about family loyalty, and hand the box directly to Trent. Keep it short. We want the photographer to capture Trent holding the deed. We do not want to drag the presentation out too long. Keep it short. Even in my supposed moment of ultimate generosity, I was being directed to step quickly back into the shadows so the golden child and her husband could shine. I will make sure it is a moment nobody in that room will ever forget, I promised smoothly. My mother nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the dangerous double meaning in my words. Yes, exactly, Evelyn agreed, pushing open one of the grand doors. Now hurry up, the mayor is waiting. I stood in the foyer for a fraction of a second longer, watching the three of them march back into the ballroom with their heads held high. They practically vibrated with the thrill of their incoming wealth. They smirked at each other, victorious and untouchable. They thought they had won the ultimate prize. They thought they had broken my spirit one final time and secured their financial future forever. I smoothed down the emerald silk of my dress, my fingers lightly grazing the velvet box inside my clutch one last time. They had no idea that they had just given me the permission I needed to stop protecting them. I was not just going to ruin my parents' night. I was going to dismantle their entire manufactured reality brick by brick in front of everyone they desperately wanted to impress. I stepped through the doors, walked back into the dazzling light of the ballroom, and prepared to drop the floor right out from under the stars. The blast of brass instruments and the overwhelming scent of imported orchids hit me the moment I stepped back into the grand ballroom. The jazz band had transitioned into an upbeat swing number, and the dance floor was packed with Atlanta elite. I navigated through the maze of silk-covered tables, my posture perfectly straight, my face a mask of serene composure. I nodded politely at family friends who had ignored my existence an hour ago, but who now offered tight smiles because they had just seen me talking to the golden couple in the lobby. My value to them was entirely proximity-based. I slipped back into my seat at table 1. The velvet box inside my clutch felt heavier now, charged with the electric anticipation of what was about to happen. Nana Beatrice did not turn her head when I sat down. She kept her eyes fixed on the dance floor, where my mother was currently twirling under the spotlight, but she leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing mine. "Did you do it?" she asked, her voice raspy but cutting clearly through the loud music. I gave a single slow nod. "The hook is set, Nana." They swallowed it whole. Nana let out a dry, knowing chuckle and took a slow sip of her iced water. Good. It is about time somebody taught my foolish daughter the difference between real money and borrowed time. Nana Beatrice was my mother, but you would never know it by looking at them. While Evelyn had spent her entire adult life chasing country club memberships and trying desperately to erase her working-class roots, Nana had kept the same modest brick house in South Atlanta for 50 years. She wore a simple knit cardigan over a sensible dress, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She was the one who had taught me that a deed with your name on it is worth more than 100 invitations to high society galas. More importantly, she was the only person in this room who had ever told my parents no. 3 years ago, when my father was quietly facing his second bankruptcy, Evelyn had tried to pressure Nana into taking out a reverse mortgage on her house to cover Trent's first failed application launch. My parents had framed it as a necessary investment in the family legacy. Nana had laughed them right out of her living room and told them to get actual jobs. When they realized they could not manipulate the matriarch, they turned their full attention back to me, the younger, supposedly more compliant target. They knew I craved their approval, and they weaponized that desire to drain my bank accounts. I looked at my grandmother, seeing the sharp intelligence shining in her dark eyes. "You are not going to try to stop me?" I asked quietly. "Evelyn is going to be furious. She might never speak to you again after tonight." Nana scoffed, adjusting the simple pearl brooch on her collar. "Oh, please. Evelyn only speaks to me when she needs a babysitter for Chloe dog or a co-signer for a loan she cannot afford. Besides, I did not raise you to be a pack mule for other people's mistakes. I watched them drain your spirit for 35 years, Zora. I watched them take the money you made from flipping those duplexes in college just to buy Chloe a luxury sports car that she crashed a month later. I watched them demand your sweat and your credit score while telling you to stay in the shadows. If you do not cut the rod out now, it will pull you down with them." I felt a tight knot in my chest loosen slightly. Hearing someone validate the reality I had lived in for so long was like breathing fresh air after drowning. My parents had spent my entire life gaslighting me, convincing me that my financial servitude was just normal family duty. Whenever I complained, I was told I was being dramatic. Nana was the only one who called it what it was: theft. "They think they are getting the Auburn Avenue Plaza tonight," I told her, keeping my eyes on the stage where the catering staff was rolling out a massive 5-tier cake. "Trent has a whole gentrification plan drafted. He wants to evict everyone and build a tech hub. He actually called it Silicon Avenue." Nana's grip on her water glass tightened until her knuckles paled. "Over my dead body. Clara has run that bakery since before you were born, and Mr. Henderson would have a heart attack if he lost that bookstore." I smiled, a genuine warm smile that had nothing to do with the icy facade I wore for my parents. "Do not worry, Nana. Clara just signed a 10-year lease extension yesterday. The rent is permanently locked in. Trent is not touching a single brick of that property." Nana relaxed her shoulders, a glint of fierce pride flashing across her weathered face. She reached over and patted my hand resting on the table. "You make sure you twist the knife, Zora. They have been playing with your money for too long. Let them see what happens when the bank finally closes its doors." I leaned back in my chair, surveying the room. The waiters were clearing the dinner plates and bringing out the silver dessert forks. The band was wrapping up their set. The climax of the evening was approaching fast, and the absolute certainty in my grandmother's voice was the final push I needed. I was completely ready. I watched my sister float across the room like she had just won the lottery. Chloe had gathered her usual entourage of local influencers and socialites near the ice sculpture, and she was holding court. Even from 3 tables away, I could hear her shrill, perfectly projected voice slicing through the smooth jazz music. She was already spending the equity of a building she did not own, handing out commercial leases like party favors to people who had never worked a hard day in their lives. "Oh my God! Sydney, you have to move your Pilates studio into the corner suite!" Chloe squealed, waving her champagne flute animatedly. "It has these gorgeous floor-to-ceiling brick walls. Trent and I are totally gutting the inside next month. I will give you the first year rent-free. Consider it a brand partnership." Sydney, a woman whose entire career consisted of posting pictures of her avocado toast, clapped her hands in delight. "That is amazing, Chloe. Are you sure the current tenants will be out in time? I heard there was some old bakery there." Chloe waved her hand dismissively, the diamond tennis bracelet I paid for catching the chandelier light. "Oh, they will be gone. Trent is serving eviction notices on Monday. We are completely rebranding the demographic." I took a slow sip of my water, my face remaining completely neutral. She was standing there carelessly plotting the destruction of Miss Clara Bakery. Miss Clara, who had known me since I was a teenager, who had baked the cupcakes for my college graduation when my own mother could not be bothered to show up because she was at a spa retreat with Chloe. I had spent 2 years fighting city council rezoning efforts to protect that bakery, and Chloe was ready to bulldoze it so her friend could teach Pilates. The sheer arrogance was almost intoxicating to witness because I knew exactly how hard the ground was going to hit her. As I watched them, a young catering waiter named David approached my table with a silver water pitcher. He poured a refill for Nana Beatrice, and then leaned down slightly as he filled my glass. He had worked at the country club for a few years and knew exactly who paid the bills for my parents' extravagant events. "Miss Zora," he murmured, keeping his eyes politely lowered. "I thought you should know. Your brother-in-law just spoke to the club general manager. He requested that the annual membership dues for your parents, plus a new platinum tier membership for himself and his wife, be invoiced directly to your development firm starting next month. He said it was part of a new family foundation restructuring." Nana Beatrice let out a sharp sound of disgust. "The parasite is already trying to attach itself to a new host," she muttered. I offered David a polite, serene smile. "Is that so? And what did the general manager say?" "He said he would need your signature on the authorization forms before transferring any billing responsibilities," David replied. Mr. Trent got quite loud. "He told the manager that you work for the family now, and your signature was just a formality. He demanded the manager draw up the paperwork tonight so you could sign it after the cake cutting." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was incredible. Trent was so confident in the trap they had laid that he was already trying to steal my country club account before the property transfer was even announced. He really believed I was completely broken. "Thank you, David," I said smoothly. "Please tell the manager to go ahead and print those authorization forms. Have him bring them directly to my father right after he makes his speech. I want to make sure the Family Foundation handles all of its own financial obligations tonight." David nodded with a slight knowing smile and quickly blended back into the crowd of servers. I looked back toward the dance floor. Trent had stepped away from Chloe Group and was currently cornering a city councilman near the bar. He was gesturing wildly, painting a picture of his grand Silicon Avenue vision. I could see the councilman nodding politely, likely assuming Trent actually had the capital to back up his aggressive networking. The entire family was running on the fumes of my reputation. They used my credit, my assets, and my name to buy their way into rooms they could never enter on their own merit. For years, I had justified my silent compliance. I used to tell myself that it was easier to just pay the bills than to deal with Evelyn weeping guilt trips or Richard angry lectures about family loyalty. I used to think that if I shielded them from the consequences of their financial recklessness, they would eventually stabilize and respect me as an equal. But watching Chloe promise away my property and hearing Trent try to hijack my corporate accounts, the final veil of illusion dropped. They did not want equality, they wanted a servant with a black card. The photographer, a frantic-looking man with a massive camera setup, suddenly jogged past my table and positioned himself at the foot of the stage. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing, and a sharp feedback whine from the microphone echoed through the grand ballroom. The chatter of the crowd quickly died down as people turned their attention toward the front. It was time. The grand illusion was about to reach its absolute peak. Evelyn and Richard gracefully walked up the short steps to the stage, holding hands and beaming at their guests. Chloe and Trent quickly abandoned their conversations and hurried over to stand at the edge of the stage, striking the perfect pose of the loyal, successful heirs waiting in the wings. They looked up at my parents with matching expressions of manufactured adoration. I remained in my seat at table 1, my hands resting lightly on my velvet clutch. I calculated the distance between my chair and the microphone. I ran through the exact sequence of events I had set in motion over the last 24 hours. Every legal document was filed. Every lock was changed. Every trap they had set for me had been quietly dismantled and rebuilt around them. Nana Beatrice reached out and squeezed my wrist. "Give them hell, baby," she whispered. I kept my eyes locked on my father as he tapped the microphone. "I plan to," I replied softly. "Let the show begin." My father tapped the microphone twice. The sharp sound cut through the remaining chatter in the grand ballroom. He stood at the center of the stage, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with the practiced ease of a man who believed his own lies. Evelyn stood right beside him, beaming with an expression of profound manufactured grace. To the 200 influential guests seated before them, they were the epitome of Black excellence and generational wealth. To me, they were two people standing on a stage built entirely on my credit score. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Richard began, his deep baritone voice projecting effortlessly over the premium sound system. 40 years ago, when Evelyn and I first said our vows, we made a promise. Not just to love each other, but to build something lasting. A legacy. We wanted to ensure that our family name would stand for progress, for community, and for excellence right here in Atlanta. I took a slow sip of my iced water. His definition of progress over the last decade had mostly consisted of dodging collection calls and hiding past due notices in his home office. But the crowd was eating it up. Mayors, judges, and corporate executives nodded along with respectful admiration. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating our past," Richard continued, raising a hand to encompass the room. "We are looking directly toward our future. Evelyn and I have been blessed beyond measure. And to whom much is given, much is expected. That is why it gives me immense pride to announce the official launch of the Richard and Evelyn Legacy Foundation." Polite applause rippled through the ballroom. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest, looking genuinely moved by a foundation that currently had exactly $0 in its bank account. "This foundation will focus on urban redevelopment and empowering the next generation of entrepreneurs," Richard announced, projecting his voice over the clapping. "But Evelyn and I know that true leadership means knowing when to pass the torch. We needed visionaries to run this initiative, people with their finger on the pulse of modern business. That is why we have appointed our son-in-law Trent and our beautiful daughter Chloe as the co-directors of the foundation." The applause swelled again as Chloe and Trent stepped forward on the stage. Chloe waved to the crowd like she had just won a national pageant. Trent stood tall, puffing out his chest, looking every bit the confident tech executive he had never actually managed to be. He wrapped an arm around Chloe, flashing a winner's smile, and waving directly to a city councilman sitting in the front row. I watched them from table one, feeling a profound sense of cold detachment. They were actually doing it. They were standing in front of the most powerful people in the city, accepting applause for a philanthropic empire that was entirely fabricated. "But a foundation is only as strong as its cornerstone," Richard said, letting the applause die down for dramatic effect. He leaned closer to the microphone, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "And tonight we are officially endowing the foundation with its very first major asset. A $2 million fully renovated commercial property located in the heart of this great city, the Auburn Avenue Plaza." A murmur of genuine impressed surprise went through the crowd. Everyone in the Atlanta commercial real estate circles knew about the Auburn Avenue Plaza. It had been featured in local business journals. It was a highly coveted, historically significant piece of property that had just undergone a massive, expensive revitalization, and my father was casually claiming it as his own. "Trent has an incredible vision for the property," Richard continued, gesturing proudly to his son-in-law. "He will be pivoting the space to create an elite technology incubator. He is calling it Silicon Avenue. Under his expert management, we will be bringing a new wave of high-end disruptive businesses to the neighborhood, elevating the entire community." I felt Nana Beatrice stiffen beside me. Elevating the community was Richard code word for evicting the Black business owners who had kept that block alive for 4 decades. He was selling out his own people so his white son-in-law could play real estate mogul and pretend to be a savior. It was a masterclass in audacity. My father had just publicly pledged a multi-million-dollar property that he did not hold the deed to, did not pay the taxes on, and had zero legal right to claim. He had backed himself into the ultimate corner. By making this announcement in front of the mayor and half the city council, he had guaranteed his own public destruction when the truth finally came out. He thought the immense pressure of this public spectacle would force me to silently hand over the deed to avoid embarrassing the family. He thought he held all the cards. Chloe leaned into the microphone, her voice high and breathless. "We are just so excited to give back to the city that has given our family so much," she chimed in. "Trent and I cannot wait to start interviewing prospective tech startups next week. The future of Auburn Avenue is going to be absolutely gorgeous." More applause, more flashing cameras. The photographer was capturing every single moment of their fraudulent victory. The sheer scale of the lie was breathtaking. They had built a massive glittering house of cards on the grandest stage in Atlanta, entirely dependent on me staying quiet and playing the loyal invisible workhorse. Richard looked down from the stage, his eyes searching the crowd until they landed directly on me sitting at table 1. His triumphant smile widened. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a silent command wrapped in paternal authority. It was the exact look he always gave me right before he expected me to open my checkbook and fix his mistakes. I stared back at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. In his mind, the transaction was already complete. He believed the velvet box in my clutch was simply a prop for his grand finale. He did not realize that publicly declaring ownership of an asset you do not own, especially while launching a philanthropic foundation in front of government officials, was not just arrogant. It was dangerously close to fraud. And I was not about to bail him out this time. The applause in the grand ballroom swelled into a deafening roar bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Mayors, local politicians, and wealthy social climbers rose to their feet, offering my parents a standing ovation for a philanthropic empire that did not actually exist. The sheer collective delusion in the room was almost cinematic. I sat perfectly still at table 1, letting the wave of manufactured adoration wash over me without absorbing a single drop. While the rest of the room clapped for Trent Imaginary Tech Hub, I reached inside my designer clutch. My fingers brushed past the velvet box, containing the now useless deed, settling instead on the smooth glass screen of my phone. I kept it low beneath the edge of the silk tablecloth, the screen brightness turned all the way down. I opened my messages and navigated to a secure thread. The contact name was Elijah Sterling. Elijah was a 60-year-old bulldog of a commercial real estate attorney. He was also my mentor, my lead corporate counsel, and the man who had taught me how to swim with sharks when I was just 22 years old. My mother had deliberately seated him at table 40, the absolute furthest table in the darkest corner of the ballroom, near the kitchen doors. She had claimed there simply was not enough room near the front, but the reality was, she deemed Elijah not aesthetically aligned with her high society friends. He did not wear a tuxedo. He did not play golf at their country club. And he did not tolerate my parents' endless posturing. He knew exactly how deep their financial rot went, because he was the one who drafted the legal firewalls that kept their debt from infecting my businesses. For the past week, while my parents were busy planning this lavish $50,000 party, Elijah and I had been working quietly behind the scenes. We had drafted the ultimate legal trap, a mechanism so airtight that my family would never be able to pry a single brick from my hands again. I stared at the blank text field. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this message, the bridge would not just be burned, it would be entirely vaporized. I typed 2 words. File it. I pressed send. The 3 seconds it took for the delivery receipt to appear felt like an eternity. The jazz band started playing a soft, triumphant underscore to accompany the applause. On stage, my father was shaking hands with a city councilman who had walked up to personally congratulate him. Trent was puffing out his chest, completely immersed in his own delusion of grandeur. Chloe was posing, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder, while the hired photographer snapped away. They were all standing on a trapdoor, completely unaware that I was holding the lever. My phone vibrated softly against my palm. I looked down at the illuminated screen. Elijah had replied, "Recorded with the county. It is done. Burn it down, Z." A profound, absolute stillness settled deep in my bones. It was the feeling of total, absolute victory. The legal maneuver was complete. As of this exact moment, the Auburn Avenue Plaza no longer belonged to my commercial real estate firm. I had officially transferred the $2 million property into an irrevocable trust. Nana Beatrice was legally named as the sole beneficiary of the trust, and Elijah Sterling was appointed as the ironclad trustee. More importantly, the trust carried an explicit, unbreakable mandate. The property could only be used to maintain the commercial leases of legacy minority-owned businesses in Atlanta. It could not be mortgaged, it could not be sold to developers, and it absolutely could not be gutted to build an artisanal tech hub. The genius of an irrevocable trust is exactly what it sounds like. It cannot be undone. Even if my parents managed to manipulate me, guilt-trip me, or threaten me into handing over the property tonight, I legally could not do it. The asset my father was currently promising to the mayor of Atlanta no longer belonged to me. He was standing on a stage soliciting public goodwill and potential investments for a foundation based entirely on stolen equity that had just evaporated into thin air. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my clutch, letting the velvet clasp snap shut. I looked over my shoulder toward the back of the room. Through the sea of standing guests and waiters carrying silver trays, I locked eyes with Elijah sitting at table 40. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, a fierce, proud grin spreading across his face. He slowly raised his water glass in a silent, solitary toast. I offered him a single sharp nod in return. Beside me, Nana Beatrice let out a soft humming sound. She had seen the text exchange over my shoulder. She picked up her linen napkin and delicately dabbed the corners of her mouth, hiding a wicked smile. "They always did love a good show," she murmured, her eyes fixed on my parents. "Time to give them the finale." The applause finally began to die down. The guests slowly took their seats, the rustling of silk dresses and the clinking of silverware settling back over the room. On stage, Richard stepped back up to the microphone. His face was flushed with the absolute high of public validation. He looked like a king surveying his conquered kingdom. "But a legacy is not just about buildings," Richard said, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of manufactured humility. "It is about the people who help you build them. It is about families standing together, supporting one another, and making sacrifices for the greater good. Evelyn and I could not have launched this foundation without the support of our entire family." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air for maximum theatrical effect. His eyes scanned the front of the room, locking directly onto me. The triumphant, commanding smirk returned to his face. He held his hand out toward table 1, gesturing for me to stand up. "We have one more piece of business to handle before we cut the cake," Richard announced, his voice ringing through the ballroom. "Zora, my quiet, hard-working daughter, come on up here. Bring that special anniversary gift you have been holding on to and officially give your sister and brother-in-law the keys to their future." The entire ballroom shifted. 200 pairs of eyes turned away from the stage and landed squarely on me. I felt the weight of their collective expectation, the silent judgment of a high society crowd that had been instructed to view me as a secondary supporting character in Chloe's glamorous life. I looked at my father. I looked at Trent's greedy, eager face. I looked at my mother wiping a fake tear of joy. I picked up my clutch. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping sharply against the polished marble floor. I stood up, smoothing down the emerald silk of my gown, and began the long walk toward the stage. The distance between table 1 and the stage was only about 30 feet, but it felt like crossing an entire lifetime. I could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes tracking my every movement. These were the power players of Atlanta. Local politicians, real estate tycoons, and wealthy socialites who had spent the last 2 hours completely ignoring me while they drank the top-shelf liquor I had paid for. Now they were watching me with mild curiosity, wondering who this woman in the emerald gown was, and why she was being called up to deliver the cornerstone of the Richard and Evelyn Legacy Foundation. As I walked past table 3, I heard a woman in a diamond choker whisper to her husband, asking if I was the event coordinator. It was a fitting assumption. For my entire adult life, my family had treated me exactly like the hired help. I was the silent engine running in the basement, keeping the lights on in the penthouse where Chloe and Trent danced. I kept my head high, my shoulders pulled back, and my gaze fixed dead ahead. My heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor, a steady rhythmic countdown to their destruction. I did not rush my steps. Let them wait. Let the anticipation build. I reached the edge of the stage where a short flight of carpeted steps led up to the platform. Evelyn stood at the top, leaning forward slightly. Her face was a masterclass in aggressive manufactured maternal pride. "Come along, darling," she coaxed softly, her tone sickeningly sweet, and meant entirely for the benefit of the mayor sitting in the front row. "Do not be shy. We are all family here, and we are just so proud of you for doing your part." I walked up the stairs, the heavy silk of my dress brushing against the carpet. The heat from the stage lights washed over me, instantly suffocating compared to the cool air of the ballroom. The air up here smelled intensely of my mother's signature floral perfume and my father's expensive cologne, a scent that had always meant I was about to be asked for money. As I stepped onto the platform, Richard moved toward me. He reached out and placed a heavy claiming hand on my bare shoulder, turning me to face the massive crowd. "Give her a round of applause, folks," Richard boomed into the microphone. His grip tightened painfully on my shoulder, a silent physical warning for me to behave and follow the script. Zora has always been our quiet one. She works behind the scenes in commercial development, but tonight she is stepping into the light to support her sister. She knows that true family legacy is about sharing the wealth and lifting each other up. A polite smattering of applause washed over the room. I looked to my left. Chloe and Trent had moved closer, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. Chloe was bouncing lightly on her heels, her eyes locked onto the velvet clutch in my hands, like a predator staring at raw meat. Trent had already extended his hand, his palm facing up, waiting for me to place the box into it like an obedient servant. He wore a smirk so deeply ingrained in his features that it looked permanent. This was a man who had burned through hundreds of thousands of dollars of investor money, and now he was seconds away from being handed a pristine, debt-free $2 million asset. He was already rehearsing his acceptance speech in his head, ready to talk about his grand vision for Silicon Avenue. I slowly opened the gold clasp of my clutch. The soft click echoed faintly over the sound system because I was standing so close to the microphone. I reached inside and pulled out the square black velvet box. It was heavy in my hands, containing the brass keys to the plaza and the original deed document folded neatly inside. A collective breath seemed to draw from the audience. This was the moment of the grand transfer, the physical manifestation of generational wealth being passed down from the hard-working parents to the visionary golden children. I held the box in both hands, resting it in front of me. I looked at Trent's outstretched hand. I did not move to give it to him. The pause stretched for 1 second, then 2, then 3. The silence in the ballroom grew thick, heavy, and incredibly uncomfortable. The jazz band had completely stopped playing. Even the catering waiters stood frozen at the edges of the room, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The perfect illusion my parents had constructed was suddenly pausing off script, and nobody knew what to do. Richard cleared his throat nervously. His fingers dug even harder into my collarbone. "Go ahead, Zora," he muttered through a clenched, smiling jaw, leaning away from the microphone so the crowd could not hear. "Give your brother-in-law the box. Give them the keys to their future right now." Chloe leaned in, dropping her sweet influencer persona for just a fraction of a second. "Stop stalling," she hissed under her breath, her blue eyes flashing with pure venom. "Hand it over before you make us all look stupid." I looked out at the sea of faces one last time. I saw Nana Beatrice sitting at table 1, sitting perfectly straight, her eyes shining with fierce protective anticipation. I saw Elijah far in the back, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, waiting for the explosion. They were the only two people in this entire building who truly knew me. The rest of them, including the four people standing on this stage, demanding my life work, were about to meet the real Zora for the very first time. I slowly pulled my shoulder away from my father's punishing grip and reached out my empty hand to take the microphone directly from him. Richard tried to pull the microphone away, but I locked my fingers around the cool metal and ripped it cleanly from his grasp. He let out a sharp breath of surprise, his perfect television smile faltering into a look of genuine bewildered panic. He was so accustomed to my absolute silent compliance that this simple physical act of defiance literally short-circuited his brain. He stumbled back half a step, leaving me standing alone at the center of the stage. The ballroom was completely silent. It was a heavy, expectant quiet, the kind of silence that precedes a massive storm. 200 of Atlanta's most powerful residents stared up at me, waiting for the heartwarming speech of a dutiful daughter handing over the keys to a multi-million-dollar empire. Instead, I looked directly at my sister. Chloe. I began, my voice perfectly clear and steady, projecting effortlessly over the premium speakers and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Earlier tonight, you stood on this stage and gave a beautiful toast. You thanked our parents for giving you the world. You thanked them for supporting your dreams. And you thanked them for raising you as an only child. I saw Chloe puff up slightly, a smug little smile playing on her glossed lips. She thought I was up here to validate her. She thought I was going to publicly accept my role as the invisible background character in her flawless life. I let a heavy beat of silence pass through the room. You were absolutely right, Chloe. I continued, my tone dropping to a cold, razor-sharp edge. They did raise an only child. Because an only child gets all the love, all the praise, and all the credit. Meanwhile, the scapegoat gets all the bills. A collective gasp ripped through the front row. The wife of the city councilman actually dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp, cracking sound echoing like a gunshot in the stunned silence. Murmurs erupted across the back tables as people shifted in their seats, exchanging shocked glances. Evelyn rushed forward, her designer heels clicking frantically against the stage floor. "Zora, what on earth are you doing?" she hissed under her breath, grabbing my elbow with manicured fingers that dug into my skin like claws. "Stop this right now. You are ruining the announcement. You are embarrassing us in front of the mayor." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with the crowd. I simply turned my head and stared down at my mother, hand on my arm. My expression was so completely void of the fear she expected that she physically recoiled. She slowly, self-consciously released her grip and took a trembling step back, her polished socialite mask cracking into a million terrified pieces. I turned my attention back to the audience. For the last 10 years, I have sat in the shadows while my parents paraded their success in front of all of you. They bragged about their brilliant real estate investments. They boasted about their luxury cars. They hosted lavish parties and talked about generational wealth and Black excellence. But they conveniently forgot to mention one tiny detail. They do not own any of it. I do. The whisper swelled into an undeniable buzz. I gestured broadly around the extravagant ballroom. Take a look around you tonight. This beautiful 40th anniversary gala. The imported white hydrangeas on your tables, the top-shelf cognac. You have been drinking the 12-piece jazz band that just finished playing. My parents did not pay for a single cent of this event. I wrote the $50,000 check so they could play the role of affluent benefactors. I am the one who pays the mortgage on their Buckhead estate so they do not face foreclosure. I fund the lavish lifestyle they use to impress every single person in this room. Richard lunged forward, his face flushing a deep, angry purple. "Turn off the microphone," he yelled, pointing wildly toward the audio technician at the back of the room. "Turn it off right now. She is having a mental breakdown." But the technician who had watched me hand over my Black Centurion card to cover the bar tab earlier that evening just stood there with his hands raised in the air, refusing to touch the soundboard. He knew exactly who was signing his paycheck tonight. I held the microphone tighter, my voice ringing out with absolute, unshakable authority. And now we arrive at the grand climax of the evening, the Richard and Evelyn Legacy Foundation. A beautiful philanthropic concept designed to elevate the community, spearheaded by a visionary tech CEO and a brilliant lifestyle influencer. I turned my head and looked directly at Trent. The arrogant, confident smirk he had worn all night was completely gone. His face was the color of chalk, and his hands were actually shaking at his sides. "It is truly a visionary concept," I told the crowd, my voice dripping with lethal sarcasm. "Especially considering my brother-in-law, Trent, currently has 3 failed startups, 0 capital, and was planning to use the Auburn Avenue Plaza to secure a massive bank loan just to pay off his own secret debts. He did not want to build a tech hub to help the community. He wanted a bailout to save himself." Chloe let out a high-pitched shriek, covering her face with her hands, as her influencer friends in the audience immediately pulled out their phones to start recording. Richard clutched his chest, breathing heavily, as the reality of his public destruction set in. "You wanted the truth, Richard," I said, looking my father dead in the eye. "You demanded I come up here and distribute the family assets. So that is exactly what I am doing. I am just making sure everyone in this room knows exactly who owns them first." I tilted the black velvet box toward the blinding stage lights and snapped the lid all the way back. Nestled inside against the pristine white satin was the original deed to the Auburn Avenue Plaza, printed on heavy legal parchment along with a heavy set of gleaming gold keys. The brass caught the light, sparkling like a beacon for every greedy eye on that stage. Despite the absolute public evisceration I had just delivered, the sight of those keys triggered a primal, desperate greed in my brother-in-law. Trent actually stepped forward. His face was still ghostly pale, but a nervous, twitchy smirk fought its way back onto his lips. His brain was so deeply conditioned by his own unearned privilege that he literally could not process his own defeat. He honestly believed my speech was just a momentary tantrum. He thought I was just venting my frustrations before ultimately surrendering, because that was what I had always done. "You made your point," Zora Trent whispered, his voice trembling as he extended his hand toward the box. His fingers twitched with anticipation. "Very dramatic. Now hand it over before you do any permanent damage to the foundation." I looked at his open, waiting palm. It was the soft, uncalloused hand of a man who had never worked a truly hard day in his life, yet felt completely entitled to the fruits of my labor. He was waiting for his multi-million-dollar allowance. I did not hand him the box. I did not even give him the dignity of a response. Instead, I simply snapped the velvet lid shut. The sharp sound echoed through the microphone still gripped in my other hand. I turned my back on Trent, leaving his hand hanging empty in the air for the entire ballroom to witness. "Where do you think you are going?" Richard barked, stepping into my path with his chest puffed out, trying to physically block my exit from the stage. "You get back to this microphone and you apologize to this room. You give your brother-in-law those keys right now, or so help me. I will make sure you never work in this town again." I looked my father up and down. "You do not have the capital to blacklist me, Richard," I said coldly, stepping effortlessly around him. "You barely have the capital to validate your parking ticket tonight." I walked down the short flight of carpeted stairs, my emerald silk gown trailing elegantly behind me. The heavy, suffocating tension in the ballroom parted like the Red Sea. The wealthy socialites, the politicians, the country club board members, they all physically leaned back, making a wide path for me as I moved toward table 1. Chloe burst into loud, ugly sobs behind me on the stage, the sound carrying over the speakers since Richard was still standing near the podium. She was stomping her foot, her flawless influencer facade completely destroyed by the reality of losing her prize. But I did not turn around. I kept my eyes locked forward. I reached table 1 just as Elijah stepped out from the shadows of the back room. My brilliant, ruthless attorney strode through the crowd with the kind of absolute authority that money simply cannot buy. He did not look at the mayor. He did not look at the elite guests. His eyes were locked entirely on me. He stopped right beside Nana Beatrice, adjusting his tailored jacket and crossing his arms over his chest like an impenetrable human shield. Nana Beatrice stood up from her chair. She smoothed down her simple knit cardigan, her spine perfectly straight. She projected more genuine dignity in that single movement than my parents had managed in 40 years of country club memberships. I held out the black velvet box and placed it gently into my grandmother's hands. "Here is the cornerstone of the true family legacy, Nana," I said, making sure my voice carried clearly over the microphone I still held. Nana Beatrice opened the box. She looked at the heavy gold keys, then traced her weathered finger over the thick parchment of the deed. She let out a soft, immensely satisfied sigh. "It is a beautiful property, Zora," she said, her raspy voice filled with profound pride. "And it is going to stay beautiful." Elijah leaned in, placing a protective hand on the back of Nana's chair. He looked past me, directing a razor-sharp glare straight at the stage where my parents stood paralyzed. "The asset is officially secured," Elijah stated, his deep voice carrying a terrifying legal weight. "And anyone who attempts to challenge the rightful owner will be dealing directly with me and my firm." I turned back around to face the stage, standing shoulder to shoulder with the only two people who had ever protected me. Trent was staring at his own empty hands, looking like a man who had just watched his winning lottery ticket blow away in the wind. Evelyn was gripping the edge of the podium, her knuckles completely white, staring at the velvet box in my grandmother's hands, with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. They were finally beginning to realize that the game was over and I had taken the board with me. I lifted the microphone back to my lips. The cold metal pressed against my skin, grounding me. The jazz band remained frozen. The catering staff had completely stopped pouring drinks. 200 of the most influential people in Atlanta were hanging on to my every single word, watching a 35-year-old black woman completely dismantle a fraudulent empire. "I bought the Auburn Avenue Plaza," I announced, making sure my voice reached every single corner of the grand ballroom. "I negotiated the purchase. I secured the city permits. I paid the contractors out of my own pocket to restore the brickwork and update the electrical systems. I spent $2 million in 2 years of my life protecting that historic property. But my parents stood on this stage tonight and promised it to you." I looked directly at the mayor, who was sitting in the front row. He looked completely captivated, his hands resting on his knees. "They promised you a tech incubator," I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. "They promised you a flagship property for their shiny new family foundation. But I need to clarify the public record right now, because what my father just attempted to do was pledge a multi-million-dollar asset that he has zero legal right to claim." Richard opened his mouth to shout something, but the sheer force of my voice cut him off before he could even form the words. "As of exactly 5 minutes ago," I declared, letting the weight of the legal reality sink into the room, "the Auburn Avenue Plaza was officially transferred into an irrevocable trust. The deed inside that velvet box is completely legally binding. My grandmother, Nana Beatrice, is the sole owner and beneficiary. My attorney, Elijah Sterling, is the managing trustee." I turned my gaze back to Trent, who looked like he was about to physically be sick right there on the stage. His grand gentrification plan, his arrogant mansplaining in the lobby, his desperate need for a financial bailout, it was all crashing down around him in real time. "The charter of this trust is ironclad," I told him, making sure the entire room heard the absolute finality in my words. "It cannot be altered. It cannot be sold. It cannot be mortgaged to fund a tech startup. And it certainly cannot be gutted to build an artisanal matcha bar. The trust has one singular, unchangeable mandate. It is dedicated exclusively to keeping legacy Black businesses in Atlanta alive and thriving." I let that sink in. I wanted the politicians and the socialites to understand exactly what I had done. I had not just taken my money back. I had weaponized my wealth to protect my community from predators like my own family. "Miss Clara Bakery is not going anywhere," I said, my voice ringing with absolute pride. Mr. Henderson Bookstore will remain on that corner for as long as he wants it there. Their commercial leases are permanently locked in. They will never be priced out of the neighborhood they helped build. I watched the realization wash over the crowd. The mayor actually leaned back in his chair and slowly nodded, an expression of profound professional respect crossing his face. He was a politician, and he knew a brilliant legal checkmate when he saw one. He also knew that supporting my parents' fake foundation now would be political suicide. Chloe, friends the same influencers she had just promised free rent to, were aggressively whispering among themselves. One of them, the Pilates instructor named Sydney, actually stood up and quietly walked out of the ballroom, clearly wanting no part of the public humiliation. Chloe saw her leave and let out a strangled gasp, reaching out a trembling hand, as if she could pull her social status back from the brink. Trent finally found his voice. It was not the booming, confident voice of a tech CEO. It was the reedy, desperate whine of a cornered con artist. "You cannot do this, Zora," he stammered, gripping the microphone stand my father had abandoned. "We are family. I already told my investors about the property. I promised them equity." "You promised them equity in a building you do not own, Trent," I corrected him smoothly. "That is not a business strategy. That is fraud. If your investors have a problem with your lack of capital, I suggest you show them your business degree and see if that pays the bills. Because my bank account is officially closed." I turned my attention to my mother. Evelyn was shaking. Her heavy diamond necklace caught the light as her chest heaved with panicked breaths. She looked around the room, making frantic eye contact with the country club board members, desperately hoping someone would intervene and save her perfectly crafted reputation. But nobody moved. The elite of Atlanta were ruthless. They respected money and they respected power. In the span of 5 minutes, my parents had been publicly exposed as having neither. I looked from Trent to Chloe and finally to my parents. The four of them stood on the stage, stripped of their power, stripped of their fake philanthropy, and stripped of the stolen wealth they had relied on for years. "You wanted a family legacy?" Richard, I asked, my tone dropping into a dangerous quiet that somehow echoed louder than a shout. "Well, here it is. You are looking at it. The legacy is secured. The community is protected. But as for the four of you up on that stage, let me make this abundantly clear. You have no foundation. You have no flagship property. You get absolutely nothing." The moment the word nothing left my lips, the invisible spell holding the grand ballroom together completely shattered. For 2 solid hours, these 200 elite guests had played along with the elegant, sophisticated illusion my parents had constructed. Now that illusion collapsed into absolute unfiltered chaos. A collective roar of overlapping voices erupted across the room. Chairs scraped violently against the polished marble floor as people shifted, stood up, or leaned over their tables to get a better look at the implosion happening on the stage. The refined, polite murmurs of Atlanta high society were instantly replaced by loud gasps, sharp accusations, and frantic whispering. Evelyn completely lost her mind. The polished, unbothered socialite persona she had spent decades cultivating evaporated in a split second. She lunges toward the edge of the stage, her high heels catching on the carpet, making her stumble awkwardly before she caught herself on the wooden podium. Her face, usually so perfectly contoured and composed, twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You cannot do this to us," Zora Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking in a shrill, hysterical pitch that required no microphone to be heard over the din of the crowd. "We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. You cannot just give our property away to that old woman." I stood at the bottom of the stage steps, entirely unfazed by her screaming. I looked up at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like a burdensome bank account. "Our property," I repeated, my voice deadly calm. "You have never paid a single property tax bill in your life, Evelyn. You do not own anything. We will sue you," Evelyn shrieked, slamming her manicured hands down on the podium. Her heavy diamond bracelet rattled loudly against the wood. "We will take you to court. We will sue you for everything you have. We will take your development firm, we will take your bank accounts, and we will take that plaza back. You owe this family and a judge will make you pay. Before I could even open my mouth to respond to her delusional threat, a booming, deeply authoritative voice cut through the chaos from right beside me. On what legal grounds, Evelyn Elijah demanded. My attorney stepped forward, leaving Nana Beatrice's side for just a moment to plant himself directly between me and the stage. Elijah did not need a microphone. He had spent 30 years commanding courtrooms, and his voice carried a terrifying, undeniable weight. He looked up at my mother with an expression of profound professional disgust. You cannot sue someone for legally transferring their own private asset into a trust, Elijah stated loudly, making sure the politicians and businessmen in the front rows heard every single word. Furthermore, if you attempt to file a frivolous lawsuit against my client, I will personally file a countersuit for harassment and extortion. And during the discovery phase of that lawsuit, I will request a full forensic audit of your personal finances. We will open up every single one of your bank accounts, your credit card statements, and your unpaid mortgages for the public record. Do you really want a judge looking at where your money actually comes from? The threat of a forensic audit hit Evelyn like a physical blow. All the air seemed to leave her lungs at once. She staggered back from the podium, her face draining of all color. She knew, and she knew that I knew, that a forensic audit would immediately expose the crushing debt, the secret bailouts, and the massive financial fraud they had been running for years. She snapped her mouth shut, her eyes darting frantically around the room like a trapped animal realizing the cage was permanently locked. While my mother was rendered entirely speechless by the crushing weight of the law, my sister was having a completely different kind of breakdown. Chloe collapsed to her knees right in the center of the stage. The heavy sequined fabric of her expensive dress pooled awkwardly around her. She began gasping for air, her chest heaving, as a full-blown panic attack set in. Her perfectly styled blonde hair fell into her face, sticking to the tears and heavy makeup streaming down her cheeks. The reality of her situation had finally breached her massive entitlement. She had no tech hub. She had no free rent for her friends. She had no family foundation to use as a prop for her influencer lifestyle. She was just a broke woman married to a broke man, sitting on a stage paid for by the sister she had spent her entire life mocking. But the absolute worst part for Chloe was not the loss of the money. It was the loss of her audience. I watched as the group of local influencers and socialites Chloe had invited to the gala reacted to her breakdown. These were the women she called her best friends. The same women who had laughed at her cruel jokes and drank my expensive champagne all night. They did not rush the stage to comfort her. They did not offer her a glass of water or a shoulder to cry on. Instead, almost in perfect unison, three of them reached into their designer purses and pulled out their smartphones. I watched the harsh, bright LED lights of their phone cameras click on, cutting through the warm, ambient lighting of the ballroom. They pointed their lenses directly at Chloe as she sobbed on the floor. They were recording her meltdown. To them, Chloe was no longer a wealthy peer. She was just incredible viral content. The downfall of an arrogant influencer was too good of a story to pass up. "Stop it!" Chloe choked out between heavy sobs, throwing a hand up to shield her ruined face from the bright phone lights. "Stop recording me! Turn those off!" "Are you kidding?" one of the women muttered loudly enough for me to hear. "This is the most authentic content you have ever given us, Chloe. Your whole brand is a lie." Chloe let out a devastated wail and curled in on herself, burying her face in her knees. Trent, who was still standing nearby, did absolutely nothing to help his wife. He just stared blankly at the crowd, completely paralyzed by his own public humiliation. Meanwhile, Richard was desperately attempting to salvage whatever tiny scraps of dignity he had left. He practically leaped off the stage, abandoning his weeping wife and hyperventilating daughter, and rushed directly toward the front table where the mayor of Atlanta was seated. "Sir, please," Richard pleaded, holding his hands up in a placating gesture as he approached the politician. "You have to understand, my daughter Zora has always been incredibly unstable. She is prone to these dramatic outbursts. The foundation is still moving forward. Trent and I have other investors lined up. We just need to pivot our strategy. The mayor stood up slowly. He did not look angry. He looked entirely indifferent, which was somehow much worse. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket and looked Richard up and down as if my father were a stranger asking for spare change on the street. Richard, the mayor, said, his tone crisp and entirely professional. I think it is best if my office is no longer associated with you or this non-existent foundation. Please do not contact my staff again. The mayor turned his back on my father, signaled to his security detail, and began walking calmly toward the grand double doors of the lobby. His departure was the signal the rest of the room was waiting for. The mass exodus began. The elite of Atlanta do not stick around for the sinking of a ship unless they can steal the silver on the way down, and there was absolutely no silver left here. I stood beside Nana Beatrice and Elijah, a calm anchor in a sea of absolute destruction, watching my parents realize they had finally pushed me too far. Richard stood frozen for only a few seconds, watching the mayor walk out the double doors. When the heavy mahogany shut behind the politician, severing my father from his last shred of high society influence, something inside him finally snapped. He spun around, his eyes locking onto me with a look of pure, unhinged hatred. He did not go to comfort my mother, who was still clutching the podium as if it were a life raft. He did not kneel down to help my sister, who was still sobbing on the floor, while her friends documented her misery. He only cared about his bruised ego and his lost capital. He marched down the carpeted steps of the stage. His face was flushed, a deep, dangerous crimson, and the veins in his neck strained against the collar of his expensive tuxedo shirt. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched tight at his sides. For the first 20 years of my life, that exact expression used to strike absolute terror into my heart. It meant I was about to be lectured, belittled, and reminded of exactly how much of a disappointment I was to the family legacy. But standing here today, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making, he did not look terrifying. He just looked pathetic. Elijah shifted his weight, preparing to step between us again, but I reached out and gently placed my hand on my attorney's arm. I shook my head once. I did not need a shield anymore. I was ready to deliver the final blow myself. Richard stopped 2 feet away from me, vibrating with rage. "You are dead to me!" He snarled, his voice a low, venomous rumble that carried over the chaotic murmurs of the fleeing guests. "Do you hear me, Zora? You are entirely dead to this family. I am formally disowning you. As of this exact moment, you are stripped of your name, you are removed from the family trust, and you will not see a single dime of inheritance when I die." I actually had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. He was standing in a rented ballroom drinking champagne paid for by his daughter, aggressively threatening to cut me out of a family trust that had been empty for a decade. He was denying me an inheritance that consisted entirely of past due credit card bills and empty promises. "You think you have won because you hid one property behind a legal loophole?" Richard continued, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "You think you can just embarrass us in front of the entire city and walk away? You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with. You stole $2 million of equity from this family tonight, and I am going to get it back." I tilted my head, studying him with cold detachment. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Richard?" "I am calling my lawyers first thing tomorrow morning." He spat, his chest heaving with every word. "And I am putting a lien on your commercial development firm. I will tie up your assets in litigation for the next 10 years if I have to. And if I have to use the family mansion as collateral to fund the lawsuit, I will do it. I will leverage the Buckhead estate to the absolute maximum to crush you in court. We will take everything you have built and leave you with nothing. That is my promise to you as the head of this family." He stood there, panting slightly, waiting for the massive threat to land. He expected me to pale. He expected me to finally crack, to beg for forgiveness to protect my business, or to panic at the thought of him risking the massive 6-bedroom estate where I had grown up. He thought the house was his ultimate trump card. To him, that sprawling colonial mansion in Buckhead was an untouchable fortress of generational wealth that proved he was a successful, powerful man. It was the absolute center of his pride. Instead of crying, a slow, genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a cold, sharp sound of absolute, undeniable amusement that cut right through his blustering anger. Richard blinked, completely thrown off guard by my reaction. His pointing finger faltered slightly, dropping a few inches, as confusion briefly waged war with his fury. Nana Beatrice let out a dry, knowing hum beside me. "Here it comes," she murmured, crossing her arms over her knit cardigan and staring at her son-in-law with a mixture of pity and intense satisfaction. I stopped laughing and took a half step forward, closing the distance between us. I looked my father dead in the eye, stripping away the very last shred of mercy I had for the man who raised me. "Oh, Richard," I said, my voice smooth and dripping with lethal calm. "Let us talk about the house." I raised my right hand and caught the eye of the audio-visual technician standing at the back of the ballroom. I gave him a single sharp nod. He did not hesitate. He reached down to his massive soundboard and pressed a heavy plastic button. Behind the stage where my parents were still standing, a massive motorized projector screen began a slow, dramatic descent from the ceiling. Richard turned his head, his angry rant dying in his throat, as the bright white light of the projector cut through the dim ballroom. He had paid for that projector to display the shiny new logo of his fake philanthropic foundation. Instead, the massive screen illuminated with a stark, high-resolution scan of a highly confidential legal document. The crisp black text and the bright red administrative stamps stood out like a beacon of absolute ruin. I made sure the zoom was set perfectly, so the font was large enough for even the people in the very back rows to read clearly. At the very top of the page, in bold, aggressive lettering, were the words, "Notice of Default and Right to Foreclose." Right below that heading was the exact address of the sprawling colonial estate in Buckhead that my parents used as their ultimate status symbol. The silence that fell over the remaining guests was entirely suffocating. The few politicians and country club board members who had lingered near the exits stopped dead in their tracks, turning back around to witness the absolute destruction of the Buckhead estate myth. "You want to leverage the house, Richard?" I asked, my voice echoing through the microphone with crystal clarity. "That is a fascinating legal strategy. But there is a massive flaw in your financial plan. You cannot use an asset as collateral when the bank has already repossessed it." I watched the color completely drain from my father's face. His jaw went slack, and his eyes darted frantically across the text projected on the screen behind him. He recognized the document immediately because he had spent the last 2 years desperately hiding copies of it from my mother. "You have not paid the mortgage on your precious 6-bedroom mansion in 24 months, I announced to the room. You ignored the warnings. You ignored the certified letters. You ignored the phone calls. You thought that if you just kept throwing lavish parties, paying country club dues, and buying my sister designer handbags, the bank would somehow forget that you owed them millions of dollars. But banks do not care about your social status, Richard. 6 months ago, they initiated formal foreclosure proceedings and moved to evict you." Evelyn let out a choked, horrifying sound. It was the visceral sound of a woman watching her entire identity burn to the ground in real time. She turned toward Richard, her hands shaking violently. "Is this true?" she demanded, her voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. "Richard, tell me this is a fake document. Tell me we still have the house. Tell me you did not lose our home." Richard could not look at her. He just stared at the glowing screen, completely paralyzed by the exposure of his ultimate shame. He had spent his entire life projecting the image of a wealthy, successful patriarch, and now his total financial incompetence was plastered on a 20-foot screen for his peers to read. "Oh, it is very real, Evelyn," I answered for him, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "But do not worry. The bank did not kick you out onto the street. You want to know why? Because a private commercial real estate firm stepped in at the 11th hour and bought the distressed debt directly from the lender. They paid off the outstanding balance in full, legally assuming total ownership of the property." I took a slow step forward, ensuring my father was forced to tear his eyes away from the screen and look directly at me. "I bought the debt, Richard." I stated the absolute finality of the words, driving a stake right through his chest. I used one of my subsidiary shell companies to purchase the foreclosure note. I did not do it because I wanted to save you. I did it to seize control of the asset before you tanked the property value with your gross negligence. You do not own a single brick of that Buckhead estate. You have zero equity. You have no collateral. For the last 6 months, you and Evelyn have been nothing more than glorified tenants living rent-free in a house that belongs entirely to me. The sheer magnitude of the humiliation finally hit him. His knees actually buckled slightly, forcing him to catch himself heavily on the wooden podium. The man who had just threatened to destroy my business, blacklist me from Atlanta society, and disown me from a fake family trust was currently realizing he was essentially a squatter in his own home. You have been sleeping under a roof paid for by the daughter you just tried to disown. I told him, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. You drive cars leased under my corporate account. You wear suits bought with my credit line. You have spent my entire life calling me a background character. But the truth is, you are just a bankrupt man playing dress-up in my world. Chloe, who had finally stopped crying long enough to process the words displayed on the massive screen, looked up from the stage floor. Her face was a mess of smeared mascara and pure terror. "But wait," she stammered loudly, her voice trembling. "If you own the house, where are Mom and Dad supposed to live? How are they supposed to help Trent and me pay off our business loans?" I looked at my sister, feeling absolutely nothing but cold indifference toward her panic. "They cannot help you, Chloe. They cannot even help themselves. And as for where they are going to live, that is no longer my problem. I am not a charity, and I am officially done funding this family and your endless delusions of grandeur." Nana Beatrice chuckled softly beside me. The sound was like dry leaves crushing underfoot. "A king without a castle is just a man in a silly hat," she whispered loud enough for Elijah to hear over the murmurs of the crowd. "And Richard Hatt is looking awfully small right now." Elijah crossed his arms, staring at my father with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator who had just watched its prey walk directly into an inescapable trap. "So much for that massive lawsuit," Richard, my attorney, called out, his deep voice booming effortlessly across the room without needing a microphone. "I suggest you save whatever pocket change you have left for a moving truck instead of a legal retainer. Because filing a frivolous lawsuit against your landlord usually does not end well for the tenant." Chloe grabbed the sleeve of Trent's custom suit, her manicured fingers digging frantically into the expensive fabric. "Trent, do something!" she pleaded, her voice cracking with absolute desperation. "Tell them you can fix this. You have investors. You have the new Silicon Avenue capital. We can just buy the house from the bank. We can bail Mom and Dad out." Trent physically recoiled from her grip as if she had suddenly caught fire. His pale eyes darted rapidly around the ballroom, looking for an exit that simply did not exist. "Chloe, stop," he hissed through his teeth, trying to pry her fingers off his arm. "Just keep your voice down. We will figure it all out later." Later. Chloe shrieked, her perfectly curated influencer composure entirely obliterated. "They do not have a house, Trent. Where are we supposed to host Thanksgiving? Where are they going to live? You said your new company was going to generate millions by the fourth quarter. Just write them a check." I watched the pathetic display for a moment, letting the heavy silence of the room amplify her hysterical demands. I turned slightly to my left. Elijah did not say a single word. My attorney simply reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila folder. He stepped forward and placed it directly into my waiting hands. "Trent cannot write a check, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her panic. "In fact, Trent cannot even afford to buy a cup of coffee right now without using a credit card tied to my subsidiary accounts." Chloe froze, whipping her head around to look down at me from the stage. "What are you talking about?" "Trent is a visionary CEO. Trent is a con artist who married a woman too obsessed with the internet to ask for his tax returns," I corrected her smoothly. I flipped open the heavy folder. The crisp sound of the thick paper echoed through the microphone. You wanted to know why he was so incredibly desperate to get his hands on the Auburn Avenue Plaza tonight. It was not because he had a brilliant vision for a tech startup. He did not have a single architect lined up. He had no construction crew. He had no business plan. I pulled the top document from the stack and held it up so the stage lights caught the bold black print. I remembered his condescending tone in the lobby just an hour ago. I remembered the way he patted my shoulder and told me I was just doing cute grunt work while he played the game like the big boys. The big boys, it turned out, were just digital loan sharks. What Trent actually has is a massive, crushing mountain of high-interest debt, I announced. He did not want to develop the plaza. He wanted to liquidate it. He was planning to immediately mortgage the property to the absolute maximum limit, take the cash, and use it to pay off the $400,000 he currently owes to an offshore cryptocurrency firm. Trent's face went from chalk white to a sickening shade of gray. He lunged forward a half step, his face twisting into an ugly mask of pure desperation. "You intercepted my private financial mail," he stammered, his voice jumping an octave in sheer panic. "That is a federal crime, Zora. You cannot use that. It is a public court filing." Trent Elijah corrected him loudly, his voice booming with deep, intimidating authority that immediately stopped Trent in his tracks. "My associates pulled it from the county clerk office yesterday morning. It is completely public record for anyone who bothers to look." I looked back down at the dossier, reading the exact figures. And that is just the principal balance. With the penalties he has accrued over the last 90 days, the number is closer to $500,000. According to these documents, Trent has completely drained your joint savings accounts. He maxed out 5 different high-limit credit cards in your name, Chloe. And next Tuesday at 9 in the morning, your visionary tech CEO husband is officially filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The word bankruptcy hit Chloe like a physical blow to the stomach. She staggered back, bumping hard into the wooden podium my mother was still clinging to. She turned her tear-streaked face to stare at her husband. The man she had paraded around social media as the ultimate wealthy. Catch the man who had confidently mocked my real estate business and promised her friends free rent was completely broke. He was worse than broke. He had actively destroyed her credit to hide his own failures. Trent Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the projector behind them. "Is it true? Did you drain my accounts? Did you lose the money?" Trent opened his mouth, desperately searching for a lie, but the absolute truth was written all over his sweating, terrified face. He held his hands up defensively. "Baby, it was just a bad market fluctuation," he pleaded, completely abandoning his arrogant persona. "The crypto algorithm tanked unexpectedly. I was going to make it all back. I just needed Zora to sign over the building tonight so I could leverage the equity. We were going to be fine. You were going to steal my sister property to pay off your gambling debts." Chloe screamed, her voice completely raw. "I was trying to save our lifestyle." Trent yelled back, his own facade finally cracking under the immense pressure. "Do you have any idea how much money you spend every single month playing pretend on the internet? Your brand partnerships pay absolutely nothing. Your clothes, your trips, your expensive dinners. I had to keep up the image. You think your parents gave us anything? They are broker than we are." I closed the manila folder and handed it back to Elijah. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of lightness in my chest. For 35 years, I had carried the crushing weight of their expectations, their debts, and their endless demands. I had let them make me feel small so they could feel grand. But standing here now, watching the golden child realize that her entire life was built on a foundation of absolute fraud, I realized my role as the scapegoat was officially terminated. The crack of Chloe's hand striking Trent's face was so loud it actually made the audio-visual technician flinch in the back of the room. The sharp, violent sound echoed through the microphone still resting on the podium, amplifying the sudden brutality of the moment. Trent's head snapped hard to the side, a bright red handprint instantly blooming across his pale cheek. He stumbled backward, tripping over the thick microphone cord, his eyes wide with absolute shock. How could you? Chloe screamed, her voice completely hoarse and stripped of any refined influencer polish. I defended you. I told everyone you were a tech genius. You used me. You ruined my brand. You ruined my life. I am filing for divorce the second we leave this building. Trent touched his stinging cheek, his shock instantly morphing into a venomous defensive anger. Divorce me, he spat back, his voice thick with contempt. Go ahead, Chloe. You will get half of my bankruptcy. You do not even know how to pay a light bill. Good luck maintaining your luxury aesthetic when you have to get a minimum wage job just to feed yourself. The golden couple, the supposed brilliant future directors of the Richard and Evelyn Legacy Foundation, were now practically at each other's throats right in the middle of the stage. They were tearing each other apart with the vicious, desperate energy of two drowning people fighting over a single piece of driftwood. I turned my gaze to my father. Richard had not moved to stop the fight. He had not moved to comfort his favorite daughter. He was clutching the edge of the heavy wooden podium with both hands, his knuckles completely white. His chest was heaving with shallow, rapid breaths. The absolute patriarch, the man who had ruled our family with an iron fist of financial threats and emotional manipulation, looked as though he had aged 20 years in the span of 10 minutes. He stared blankly at the massive projector screen, still displaying his foreclosure notice, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his failure. He had no house. He had no foundation. He had no wealthy son-in-law to bail him out. His power was entirely gone. Evelyn, however, was still fighting. But she was no longer fighting with the arrogant confidence of a buckhead socialite. She was fighting like a woman who had just been thrown out of an airplane without a parachute. She scrambled down the stage steps, nearly tripping over the hem of her expensive beaded gown. She practically threw herself toward me, her face a horrific mess of running mascara and streaked foundation. The elegant, composed mother, who had spent my entire life telling me to sit quietly in the background, was now weeping uncontrollably. Zora. Please. Evelyn sobbed, her voice a desperate, ugly wail. She reached out, trying to grab my hands, but I took a smooth step backward, refusing to let her touch me. Please stop this. Stop making a scene. Look what you are doing to your father. Look what you are doing to your sister. We are a family. We can fix this quietly. Just take the document down. Please, Zora. I am begging you. Do not destroy us like this. I looked at her tear-stained face. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no guilt. For decades, she had used my empathy as a weapon against me. She had trained me to believe that their pain was my responsibility, and that my success only mattered if it could be used to shield them from the consequences of their own actions. But that training was officially broken. I tilted my head, studying her desperate, pleading eyes. You made the scene, Evelyn, I replied, my voice completely cold and remarkably steady. I just provided the script. Evelyn let out a devastated gasp, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. You are a monster, she wept, shaking her head frantically. You planned this. You set us up to be humiliated in front of everyone. I did not set you up, Evelyn, I corrected her smoothly, not backing down an inch. I just stopped covering your tracks. You decided to throw a $50,000 party with my money. You decided to stand on that stage and claim a property you do not own. You decided to ignore the bank notices for 2 years. All I did was shine a light on the reality you built. If the truth destroys you, that is because your entire life is a lie. Evelyn turned away from me, her sobs echoing loudly in the nearly empty ballroom. She looked toward Richard, but my father just stared blankly ahead, completely unresponsive. Richard, do something, she shrieked at him. Tell them we still have money. Call your investors. Do not just stand there. Richard finally let go of the podium. He looked at his wife, his eyes completely hollow. There are no investors, Evelyn. He rasped, his voice completely defeated. There is nothing left. It is gone. It is all gone. The blame game immediately shifted gears. Evelyn's face contorted with renewed fury. She marched up the stairs and slapped Richard hard on the arm. "You promised me we were fine," she screamed at him. "You told me the bank was working with us. You told me Trent was going to make us millions. You lied to me." Richard swatted her hand away, his own anger finally boiling over. "I lied to you because you never stopped spending," he roared back at her, his voice cracking. "You had to have the country club membership. You had to throw this ridiculous anniversary gala. You are the one who pushed Zora away. If you had just treated her better, she would have handed over the building tonight." "It is my fault," Evelyn shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You are the supposed head of this family. You are the one who co-signed those ridiculous loans for Trent. You are the one who lost the house." I stood beside Elijah and Nana Beatrice, watching my family absolutely cannibalize one another. It was a vicious, ugly spectacle. They were no longer a united front. Without my money to act as the glue holding their toxic dynamic together, they instantly turned on each other, desperately trying to assign blame for the collapse of their fraudulent empire. They were tearing down the very legacy they had spent their entire lives pretending to build. I watched my parents tear into each other with a mixture of disgust and profound relief. They were so consumed by their own panic, so desperate to deflect the blame onto anyone else, that they had momentarily forgotten I was even standing there. I reached into my clutch one final time. My fingers bypassed the velvet box I had already handed to my grandmother and settled on a crisp, perfectly folded piece of paper. It was the absolute last piece of business I had to conduct tonight. I pulled the document out, smoothing the creases with deliberate, unhurried care. I walked past Trent and Chloe, who were now viciously screaming about hidden credit card statements and ruined credit scores. I stepped right up to the heavy wooden podium where my parents were still standing. Evelyn was mid-sentence, hurling another tearful accusation at Richard, when I gently placed the piece of paper down on the polished wood, right between them. The movement was quiet, but the stark white paper drew their eyes immediately. They both stopped arguing. Richard looked down, his chest still heaving. Evelyn wiped her smeared mascara, squinting at the bold black text at the top of the page. It was a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. "What is this?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. She looked from the paper to my face, her eyes wide with a brand new layer of terror. "It is exactly what it looks like, Evelyn," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, as if we were discussing the weather rather than her impending homelessness. "It is a legally binding eviction notice. As the sole owner of the Buckhead estate, I am formally terminating your residency. You have exactly 1 month to pack your designer clothes, your crystal champagne flutes, and whatever dignity you have left, and vacate my property." Richard slammed his hand down on the podium, missing the paper by an inch. "You cannot do this!" He roared, the last remnants of his patriarchal authority flaring up in a pathetic burst of desperation. "We are your parents. You cannot just throw us out onto the street. We have nowhere to go." I looked at him, feeling the final invisible string tying me to this man snap completely. "You stood on this stage 20 minutes ago and told a room full of people that I was dead to you," I reminded him smoothly. "You explicitly announced that you were raising an only child. Well, Richard, since I'm not family, I certainly cannot be expected to house you." Evelyn let out a devastated wail, burying her face in her hands. "You have 30 days, I repeated, ensuring there was absolutely no room for negotiation in my voice. "The locks will be changed on the 31st day. If you are still inside my house, I will have the authorities remove you for trespassing. But do not worry too much. Since Chloe is the golden child you sacrificed everything for, I am sure the only child can let you sleep on her couch. Assuming she still has an apartment after Trent bankruptcy goes through." I did not wait for their response. I did not need to hear another excuse, another threat, or another fake apology. I turned my back on the stage and the screaming, fighting family I was leaving behind. The grand ballroom was nearly empty now. The catering staff was quietly clearing the tables, keeping their heads down and avoiding eye contact. The 12-piece jazz band had long since packed up their instruments. The only sounds left in the massive, extravagant space were the vicious insults my sister and her husband were hurling at each other, and the loud, ugly sobs of my mother echoing off the crystal chandeliers. It was the soundtrack of a toxic empire finally collapsing under its own weight. I walked down the center aisle, my emerald gown gliding over the marble floor. I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. The suffocating pressure in my chest, a weight I had carried since childhood, was completely gone. Elijah was waiting for me near the exit, standing tall and proud. Beside him, Nana Beatrice offered me a warm, brilliant smile that reached all the way to her wise, observant eyes. "Ready to go, baby?" she asked, holding out her arm. I smiled back, a genuine expression of absolute freedom. "I am more than ready, Nana." I linked my arm firmly through hers. Elijah walked on my other side, his presence a silent, impenetrable guard against the chaos we were leaving behind. Together, the three of us pushed open the heavy double doors of the country club lobby and stepped out into the cool, crisp Atlanta night. The valet brought my car around, and as we drove away from the rolling green hills of the golf course, I did not look in the rearview mirror even once. 6 months later, the air in Atlanta was warm and thick with the smell of sweet magnolias and fresh baked bread. I stood on the corner of Auburn Avenue, holding a steaming cup of coffee and looking down the bustling, vibrant street. The plaza was thriving. Every single storefront was occupied and busy. Across the street, Miss Clara Bakery had a line of customers stretching out the door, drawn in by the scent of her famous peach cobbler. Next door, Mr. Henderson Bookstore was hosting a local author reading event, the large glass windows plastered with brightly colored flyers celebrating Black literature. There were no sterile tech hubs. There were no artisanal matcha bars. There was only the beautiful, beating heart of a community that had been preserved and protected. Nana Beatrice walked out of the bakery carrying a small white paper box tied with a pink string. She navigated the crowded sidewalk with surprising speed for an 80-year-old woman, her face glowing with quiet satisfaction. "Clara sends her love," Nana said, handing me a warm blueberry muffin wrapped in a napkin. "She also said to tell you the new plumbing you installed in the kitchen is working like an absolute dream." I took a bite of the muffin, savoring the sweetness. "That is great to hear. Elijah is bringing the finalized trust documents by the office later today for your signature, just to officially close out the annual review." Nana nodded, taking a sip of her own coffee. She leaned back against the brick wall of the plaza, watching the foot traffic. "I heard from your cousin David yesterday," she mentioned casually, though her sharp eyes told me she knew exactly what she was doing. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for the update. I had completely blocked my parents and my sister on every single platform the night of the gala, changing my phone number and instructing my security team to turn them away if they ever showed up at my corporate office. Nana was my only source of information, and she only shared what she knew I could handle hearing. "Chloe's divorce was finalized last week," Nana said, shaking her head slowly. "Trent left the state right after the bankruptcy court liquidated his assets. Chloe had to move out of that luxury condo. David said she is working the cosmetics counter at a department store in the mall now. She tried to start a new social media channel about her healing journey, but nobody is watching." I felt a brief, fleeting moment of pity, but it vanished as quickly as it arrived. "And Evelyn and Richard?" I asked. Nana let out a dry chuckle. "They packed up and left your house on day 29. They are renting a tiny 2-bedroom apartment out in the suburbs now. Evelyn had to sell most of her jewelry just to cover the security deposit. Richard is working as a consultant for some low-level logistics company. They do not go to the country club anymore. They do not throw dinner parties. They just sit in that little apartment and blame each other for losing the lottery." I looked at the beautiful, historic brick buildings surrounding us. My parents had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They had demanded my resources, drained my energy, and tried to erase my identity to prop up their own fragile egos. They wanted me to be invisible so they could shine. But as I stood in the sunlight of Auburn Avenue, watching the legacy I had actually built thrive and grow, I realized they had made a fatal miscalculation. They wanted me to be invisible so they could shine. But they forgot one thing about the dark: it is the only place where you can truly see who holds the power. The most powerful lesson I learned from this journey is that family loyalty should never cost you your peace, your dignity, or your financial security. For years, I believed that if I just gave enough, my parents and sister would finally love and respect me. But you cannot buy genuine affection from people who only see you as a resource. Setting hard boundaries is not an act of selfishness. It is a necessary act of survival. Blood does not give anyone the right to exploit your hard work. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who drag you down and build a beautiful legacy with those who truly value your worth. If you have ever had to set difficult boundaries with toxic family members to protect your own future, share your experience in the comments below and hit the subscribe button to join our community.